Hello everyone. Welcome to Daily English Practice. Learn English through short stories. Once upon a time, in a quiet little village, there lived an old woman named Granny Meg. She was cheerful, hardworking, and always found joy in the smallest things. She had a tiny cottage at the edge of the village, surrounded by a small garden full of bright flowers and a few chickens that clucked happily around her yard. One bright morning, after finishing her daily chores, Granny Meg decided to take a walk to the nearby meadow. She loved the fresh air, the singing birds, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. As she walked along the winding path, she hummed a happy tune. Suddenly, she spotted something strange on the ground. It was a big, round, lumpy object covered in dust and dirt. Granny Meg bent down and peered at it closely. "Well, would you look at that," she exclaimed. "A fine old pot, just sitting here by the roadside." The pot looked worn and rusty, but Granny Meg saw it differently. "Oh, what luck," she said, clapping her hands together. "I could use this to store my flour or maybe plant some herbs in it." She tried to lift the pot, but it was surprisingly heavy. What could be inside, she wondered aloud. Curiosity got the better of her, and she bent forward, peering inside. To her surprise, the pot was filled with gold coins. Granny Meg gasped and quickly looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. But there was no one on the road except a few birds hopping along the fence. Well, she chuckled. "It seems I've found a fortune. What a lucky day this is." Being an honest woman, she thought about taking the pot to the village elder, but then she shook her head. If someone had lost such a treasure, they would have surely come looking for it. Since it's just lying here, it must belong to no one. She decided to take the pot home. But it was too heavy to carry, so she grabbed the handle and started dragging it along the road. It made a loud scraping sound, but she didn't mind. As she walked, she couldn't stop thinking about all the things she could do with the gold. "I could buy a new cow, repair my roof, or even get a nice warm shawl for the winter." But after a while, she stopped to catch her breath and glanced at the pot again. To her shock, the gold was gone. Instead, the pot was now full of silver coins. Granny Meg stared at it for a moment. Then, instead of feeling disappointed, she smiled. "Oh, well. Silver is still wonderful. Not as grand as gold, but silver is good enough for me." Happily, she continued dragging the pot along the road. A little further down the path, she stopped to wipe the sweat off her forehead and peeked inside the pot once more. To her surprise, the silver had disappeared. Now, the pot was full of shiny iron pieces. Granny Meg blinked. Then, instead of feeling sad, she laughed. "Well, isn't that odd? But iron is useful too. I can sell it or use it to fix my broken gate." With a cheerful heart, she kept going, humming a little tune. But the pot had more surprises in store. Every time Granny Meg stopped to look inside, its contents changed. First, it turned into a pile of smooth stones. Then, the stones disappeared, and the pot was filled with dry leaves. By the time Granny Meg reached her cottage, the pot was completely empty. She wiped her hands and looked at it with amusement. "Well, that was quite the adventure," she chuckled. "I started with gold and ended up with nothing at all. But what a fine old pot I have now." She placed the pot near her garden and filled it with water for the birds to drink. As she sat down on her little bench, she shook her head and laughed. "Some might call this bad luck, but I say it was a fine journey. And in the end, I still got something useful." And so, Granny Meg lived happily with her new pot, proving that a cheerful heart can turn any misfortune into joy. Subscribe the channel for more interesting stories.